pretty much they're always in line with one another, and the groups have the same preferences. And so once that process is done, then we bring the committee back together and we review the feedback that we've received from all of the different constituent groups, double check how those decisions would reflect the variables, making sure we haven't missed one of those and the overall purpose, and from that then bringing a final recommendation together that we can then present to you, which is what leads us here this evening.
Just some highlights of the calendar. The full calendar is in your board packet. Very unique. Every year is a little bit different. This year, we were very fortunate and able to divide up the days. So there's 44 days in first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, and 48 in fourth quarter. So the days fell very nicely. Next year, it won't be, every year it bumps a day. And so it's not always possible to divide it up, but it came out very nicely, which helps instruction. Teachers have days that they can count on, that they have students, and we have those 4 additional days in the fourth quarter to account for our NISA testing. So that's what with our first semester ending on December 20th, coming back on January 7th, and the last day of school being May 23rd. So when we looked at all of our calendar variables, we listened to the feedback from our community groups and parent groups. This is the best calendar we feel to meet the needs of our students in instruction. We'd be happy to answer, excuse me, Ms. Mungbar, we had some things also to talk about. As the committee reached its final conclusion, we also started talking about some future work. So, do you want?
One thing I want to say is that this is my second year on this committee, and it has gone very smooth. It's what I learned, big thing I learned was the 44, 44, and 44, and 48 days, which is amazing. There are a couple of times that I was actually fighting for something very different than everybody else wanted. I can't even remember why right now. One of them was I truly just wanted to start a day later. There's something about starting before August 15th that just feels wrong to me. And there's something about, and it was purely emotional, but what's really good is that having the broad representation on the committee, it was Mark Larson and I were talking, and he was with me until finally he realized, oh, wait, that made it a 40-day or 42-day quarter versus 44. And he pointed out, if you're teaching a quarter-long class, you've just taken 2 days away. And so, was really, those are the kind of discussions of that give and take. With that said, I really do think that we have given one of the best calendars that we can give following the variables that were created in 2011 and that have truly, I think, helped us to make some really consistent calendars. We've had several years of very consistent calendars created for consistent reasons. And they bring us a lot of clarity on what we're trying to do in making our calendar. So somebody says, oh, do you like working on the calendar committee? Don't you have all these arguments? And the answer is no, we don't, because we have a very clear understanding of what our purpose is, and it's to me, very clear that it's very student-oriented, educational purposes, and yet we still do talk about parental concerns. We both talked about parental concerns in the sense of, if I have an extra day at Christmas time, I can do this with my family, as well as we have many families who need us to be in school, so we need to think of a variety of issues. With that said, I also want to say that, and when you look at it, I keep trying to fight John here that I did not come to school in the middle of August when I was a kid. And he has proven me wrong several times that I did come to school earlier than I think I did. And I think you just can't fight with some of those facts, even though we might want to do that. With that said, one thing the committee would also like to bring forward as a consideration is that we really do think that we have such a good system in place, strong variables, it all kind of works together, that we would like to suggest that we, in the next step would be is that we start looking at making a 2- and 3-year calendar as opposed to doing it year by year, possibly even looking at making a 5-year calendar, whether we're confident to do it that way or not. That would help out in many, many ways, help family planning, help teachers planning. It would help out with a variety of things. So for the next committee, that we were suggesting that they would be creating a 2, 3, 5 year, whatever the board would think. But we discussed it at the committee and all agreed that we were at that point. So.
Very good. Thank you, Annie. Barb? Good job. I used to be a calendar fighter, but logic has reigned. My only concern is, and I don't think it's really an issue for the calendar committee, but it's an issue that I think we need to think about, and that is that winter break still seems to be quite long to me. And my family, we enjoy that, but I think for some families, getting the time off to take care for kids in elementary school is a real burden. And so I'm fine with us going and looking at 2- and 3- and 5-year calendars. Perhaps maybe this committee could then go and do the work of reaching out to community partners to help families go and handle long breaks. I know a lot of our CLC partners already do cover things like fall break and spring break and offer different things, but that winter break is a really, I think it's a huge burden. I can't imagine if I were a single parent, a single mom, and I didn't have a job that had the benefit of vacation time, what I would do. So I would really like the committee, once it gets to the point where it's doing 2- and 3- and 5-year calendars, maybe morph over to how can families better handle these breaks.
Good point, thank you.
And I think that was, if I may add, that is something that was on the mind, certainly of the teachers on the committee. We know full well the mix of students that we work with, and that many of those students don't have the same resources outside of school that others do. I recall in my classroom even being careful about saying such things to students as have a great winter break, because I knew that for some of my students, that was an unsafe or scary or unpredictable time in their lives when they didn't have the stability that school provided. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I can also assure you that that is something that's always at the forefront of teachers' minds, is knowing what might be going on for our students when they're not with us, and that sensitivity to that.
I've got Kathy and then Matt.
One of the things that I recalled when we embarked upon looking at this earlier calendar schedule was, would it affect student outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've seen that data come forward with our graduation rates, with our scores on our testing, with our scores on just students' performance in their classrooms. So as I looked at it, I said, okay, it proved right. It is improving what we're here for, which is student outcomes. The second is it's getting to be to the point where it's almost predictable, because we're missing that later start this year because it's the 13th, and I can remember being just like Barb, do we have to start before the middle of August?
Yeah.
And understanding, I think it was my son-in-law who teaches in York said, you know, your student achievement's going to go up if you just let kids out at winter break and not make them have that test when they get back. And I looked at their data at that time, and I think that might have been in 2006 or 2007. And I said, I can't argue with your numbers. I hate you math teachers. You always use numbers, and you always have them right. So I do think it did what we wanted it to do, and that was improving student outcomes. We don't hear a whole lot of community outcry. I would agree with Barb that we might want to look at our CLCs and the providers in those CLCs and see if that winter break, they can find some way to do some additional programming if they're not, or maybe just a list of who does do the programming in our school program, in our schools where we have those before and after school programs. I think that would help us a lot down the future, especially if we're going to do 3- and 5-year calendars.
Good to know.
Matt?
I have a couple questions. So I know some districts around here will end their school year a year early if they don't, or day early if they don't claim a snow day. How do we accommodate for snow days? Is that something that we've ever considered as a calendar, as we looked at the calendar?
Sure, great question. We have the days we have built into our calendar, and we hope we can use every single one of them for learning. And so we don't have, some districts will actually say, we have a 177-day calendar, we're adding 3 days for snow days. If we don't use them, we'll stick with our plan of 170 days. and we have a 180-day calendar with the plan of using 180. So if we lose one to snow day, we've actually lost a day we hope to have instruction. So we have a different mindset in how we schedule our days. The state looks at it in hours. So the state has a requirement of 1,080 hours for secondary school, 1,032 hours for elementary school. And we keep track of every single school, when Southwest hosts basketball and does state basketball and is not in school. We keep track of all of those to make sure that we meet all of our minimums. But we really hope to use all 180 days and that there aren't, Dr. Joel, I'm sorry, no snow days during the year, and that they're all in instruction. So when we have a snow day, if we have enough to get us below the 1,080 or 1,032, we'll add extra. If we just lose one or two, the teachers just work hard to make up for that time.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't know the exact number, that's fine, but how many days would we have to have snow days to add to the end of a calendar?
I'm sure there aren't lots of students watching maybe
Yeah.
right now, but it's approximately 5.
Okay.
If you were looking at hours, it'd be approximately 5.
Okay. Another question. I noticed that on this year's calendar, it indicated that our first week of school was an hour shorter or had some shorter days. I don't see that indicated on this proposed calendar. Is that not part of the plan? Or, I mean, you said earlier that we're not talking about how long the day is, so I don't know.
It just happens later in the process.
Okay.
So we're the first group, and so we set the student calendar, and then other groups come in after us and do things like professional development, early out, PLC days. That's just another group in the process. So that will happen, usually it's done the spring before the school year begins.
Okay.
So it'll happen a year
But-
from now.
If I'm understanding correctly, we had great discussion about the benefit of it being PLC days, the PLC calendar for the first week of school, so that as opposed to saying early out for the first 3 days and then regular days for 2 days, and then you have exhausted kids by Thursday
Yeah.
night, and you have parents going, when do I supposed to be there, of talking about making it all PLC calendar, I mean, PLC days the first week. And there was also discussion, well, do you do that for younger? You make full days for older? Again, more consideration, but I think it's almost to the point of that's also going to become somewhat institutionalized because of finding some of the best practices.
Well, and I would just say, as I've talked with principals and parents, especially of kindergartners, that first week, without naps and stuff like that is pretty rough on some of them. So I know that that's been something that's been appreciated in the past. I guess my last, just as a comment, this year actually I heard some negative feedback because we didn't have a full 2-week Christmas break. And so I'm glad to see that we do have a full 2-week Christmas break in here because I feel like it creates some great opportunities for families to connect, spend some time together. And so I'm excited about that being in this calendar.
Lanny?
This is a very good calendar. Thank you very much for the work that you've done to the whole committee on that. We've almost reached the point where we could set up a computer program and have an algorithm that would just generate calendars for the next 100 years following these
It's called
rules.
John Neal.
Yeah.
2.0.
And so I do think that it's very tempting to say, let's look 5 years out and approve that now and provide some stability to families that are looking at longer range planning on that. I would just caution us as a board that if we choose to approve a calendar 5 years out, there will be people in the community that will rely on that. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we want to work with an alternative calendar, or maybe something creative comes out of our strategic planning discussions related to calendar, or perhaps the budgets become so challenging that we have to look at calendar adjustments to try to cut costs, that if we do approve 5 years out, we want to be careful about tying our hands. It's another one of those trade-offs that we'll have to think very carefully about before proceeding. But again, excellent work. Thank you. I know it takes a lot of effort to get to this point, and I appreciate it.
Kathy?
In response to Matt's question or comment about the 2 weeks off, if I remember doing this over 5 years, there's always going to be a couple of years in that cycle of 6 to 7 years that we have a shorter winter break. Am I correct? So that we hit that time frame, the equalization of the times of each semester or quarters, and then exiting first semester at winter break and finishing before Memorial Day. Am I correct?
That's correct. It'd be nice if those winter holidays were always a Monday holiday, like, Memorial Day or Labor Day.
We
but
can't
because
move
we
Christmas.
can't, right? Because they move to different days of the week.
Okay.
Those are the variables that are always impossible.
Yeah, I was just trying
It's
to-
possible to predict. It just kind of throws a
I was trying to
wrench.
remember that, it seemed like there was one year, it was like 8 days, and somebody
Right.
goes, how come this one's so short, and this one is 2.5 weeks?
I think in
Which
the
is-
last, right, I think we've been anywhere from 8 to 11 days.
That's what I recall.
Has been the general
8 to
range over the
11
last
school
10
days.
years.
School,
Right.
yeah.
Yes, correct.
And this is probably about the hill I almost died on, because I thought we should come back, like, when most people go back to work, like on January 2nd. But logic prevailed again, because we used the variables with it. We would have come back to a 2-day week, which we know is not good. It would have done some wonky things to numbers and so forth. So again, it was one of those things of, once you start putting those variables into action, it really helps sanity to reign. I mean, again, I was just like, why do we need to stay out for so long? And then it came back with, well, you want to come back to a 2-day week when we know that's not a great thing after so forth. So again, I think we just have it to where a science.
Other comments? I would just have two things that I'd like to say. First, I remember back in the olden days when staff would try to model different aspects or different parameters, and we'd get a calendar A, B, and C, and maybe a couple of those were things that we didn't really care for anyway, so why were we even looking at them? And this idea that we got of creating these parameters then I think does make it formulaic, to Annie and Lanny's point, and takes a lot of the emotion out of it, I think. The other thing that I would point out is the data that we can point to that shows that there has been an actual academic benefit to doing the calendar this way. That this is not, again, it's not emotional, it's not random. It's very much based on student achievement, student outcomes, to Kathy's point. So I'm glad that that this is the way we do it now. It's something that makes a lot of sense to me. And again, the eye on the prize is doing what's best for kids. So thank you for that. With nothing else, then this will be back for action at our next meeting. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Next, we have a little work to do tonight with some action items, starting with 10.2.1, tuition charges for 2017-18. Kathy?
I would move approval.
Lanny?
Second?
Questions or comments? Seeing none, Laura, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Mumgarde?
Yes.
Yes.
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Mrs. Danick?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes. And then next we have item 10.2.2, math expressions, curriculum materials. I saw Lanny first.
Move approval of item 10.2.2.
Kathy?
I would second that motion.
Discussion? Seeing none, Laura, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Schulte?
Yes.
Ms. Mumgarde?
Yes.
Mrs. Danick?
Yes.
Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Ms. Byer?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes. Next, that brings us down to informational items and reports. Are there any reports from board committees? Lanny, is there a report from the Career Academy?
There is, yes. The Career Academy Board met on April 12th. Some of the items that we discussed included facilities updates that we plan to do over the summer. And again, in partnership with SCC, the LPS facilities team will be doing the design work on these projects, and SCC's maintenance team will be completing them. Just as an example of what some of these little minor adjustments are, in the food lab, we'll be removing a minor wing wall to create an open classroom space that we can use for the health sciences pathway. Between the conference room and the health sciences lab, we're looking at adding a small door to facilitate clinical work testing. And then the store space that's near the entrance, we're looking at doing an expansion of the counseling center, workstations for the embedded teachers, storage space, and a vending area for TCA and SCC users. Funding of this will come from TCA project savings, and this is, again, work that we expect to complete over the summer and be ready for fall. We also had an update on fundraising for the Career Academy. We had about 40 students that reached the national competition level, and so we had some discussion about the timing of helping those students, because typically what happens is they'll win a state competition, and then within a few days need to make a decision about whether they'll go to that national competition. Like LPS as a whole, we have about 45% of our students on free and reduced lunch out at the Career Academy, and we don't want cost to be a barrier to their participation in national competitions. So the foundation is looking at creating another category of fundraising for national competition travel expenses. Also discuss the fact that the initial asks that were made in relationship to the Career Academy were 3-year commitments. And believe it or not, we are at the point where we're going back out to our very generous community partners that have donated to the project and looking for a renewal of those 3-year commitments. Dan's director's report included some information on applications. Our application numbers are actually a little bit behind where we were last year, but we're getting a little bit better at honing in on who can be successful at the Career Academy, and so our processed and our confirmed admitted numbers are actually very similar to what we had last year. We also talked a little bit about IT internships, and it was noted that all of our senior IT students have been offered an internship within the community. So this is, again, an excellent opportunity for hands-on learning through the Career Academy program. And finally, you each should have received an invitation for May 12th in the evening for Taste of TCA, where we'll get an opportunity to sample some of the work of our culinary pathway students. So I hope you'll be able to attend that. Be a great way to wrap up another great year at the Career Academy. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Lanny. And that brings us to the superintendent's update. Dr. Joel.
Each year for the last 7 years, high school students about this time remind me, or they think that we owe them 4 days. So that's been the standard. And I heard tonight now it could be 5 days, so I'm looking forward to that change in conversation going forward. So thank you both very much for making that public. One quick announcement, Jenny Benson was recently elected president of NCA, and many know Jenny. We've worked with Jenny for a lot of years. We're very excited that she's going to be representing teachers across the state, but also be a great representative for Lincoln Public Schools. And then legislation. You know, if you've got idle time during the day, put on Channel 12. There's plenty of good stuff to be watched. And of course, school funding is still very much in question right now. That concludes my report.
Thanks, Steve. Next is the monthly financial report. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, that brings us to announcements of upcoming events for the board. Kathy?
As we get to the announcements, you'll notice that Donald announced the backpack program, but as your team captain, if you haven't turned in your little packet with your donations, could you please get them to me by Saturday? Or you can deliver them out to the backpack walk on Saturday. And Sherry will have someone there to bank all the dollars that we do. So kids greatly appreciated all the money that we raise and the meals that it provides. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kathy. Tomorrow, April 26th, we have the East High Shining Stars reception at 3:15 p.m. at East High. On April 27th, we have the FLPS board meeting, 8:15 a.m., location to be announced. And then we have the Lincoln Children's Zoo expansion groundbreaking, 9 a.m. at Lincoln Children's Zoo. I know several of us are going to be going to that. April 28th, we have the Coppell YMCA ribbon cutting at 2 p.m. at 8700 Yankee Woods Drive. April 29th, on Saturday, as Kathy mentioned, is the Backpack Walk at 10 a.m. at East High School. May 1st is the African American Student Recognition at 6:30 p.m. at Southeast Community College. May 3rd is the Chamber Coffee at 8 a.m. at the Chamber office. That evening is the LPS Retirement Celebration at 5 p.m. at the Lincoln Country Club. And then May 9th is our next board meeting at 6 p.m. Next, that brings us to public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board? Annie?
Just something I'd like to say. It's one of those markers, life markers, but noted this week that my Lincoln High School principal passed away this past week, Sam Nelson. And I just wanted to make a note because he was a very good man, and I was reading his obituary. And it's funny because when you're a kid, he seems so old. And now I'm looking at how old he was when he was my principal, and he wasn't that old. But I think we didn't say all means all back then in the day, but Mr. Nelson truly, I think, helped create a space at Lincoln High when I was there that meant that. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, it's like we have very many good teachers now. We have very many teachers living amongst us, and it's just good to mark that they have impact on a lot of kids. So I want to thank Mr. Nelson for all he gave me, and I never went into his office. I want to make that clear.
Kathy?
Since we're noticing those we lost, Legene Price was a media specialist at Lincoln Northeast for a very long time. She was a champion of how to build a good media environment for students. And I worked with her before I ever ran for the board, because she taught me more about construction than I ever wanted to know about how many kids should be crammed into a space before it was unsafe, and making sure I knew that the Northeast Media Center at that time was unsafe. And all of the things that she helped prepare when I got to work on that committee with Lincoln Public Schools as a representative from Northeast. Legene passed away last week. Her son teaches at Kehoe. She was a champion for kids and a champion for literacy. And I know her memorials harvested books, so literacy right into her future. So thanks, Legene.
Very good. Thank you for those remembrances, ladies. Next, there is no request for a closed session, no ESU meeting. We good? All right. So that means that we stand adjourned.